Welcome to the debates. Our discussion today, it centers on one of the most provocative assertions from the source material, the claim that the very infrastructure of the modern state, specifically this universal requirement for numerical identities like social security numbers, birth certificates, driver's license,
through a lens of, inefficiency or regulation, but as an entity that's potentially vying for ultimate authority over human existence.
Precisely. So the central question we really have to grapple with today is this. Is the modern bureaucratic identity system fundamentally the realization of an apocalyptic entity because it achieves a substitution? Replacing a God-given inalienable identity with a system-owned alienable proxy? Or, on the other hand, is the administrative system primarily a neutral structure, and its danger lies only in its function as a kind of conditional choke point for economic and social control? I'm going to argue that the conversion of the living name into a conditional, numerical proxy is the core substitution the warns against.
And I'll be coming at it from a slightly different perspective. I fully acknowledge the immense existential danger of this administrative control, especially its power over one's ability to buy and sell. That's critical. However, I believe that equating the system's current administrative function to a full ontological replacement of the soul, well, that requires a more careful distinction between the state's practical control over recognition and the actual annihilation of an inherent God-given identity.
My position really begins with the source material's deep emphasis on identity. The text defines identity not as a tag, but as a name, a reflection of covenant, lineage, and being itself. You see this exemplified in scriptural acts of renaming. And this identity is, crucially, inalienable. It can't be transferred or sold or revoked, precisely because it exists prior to and independent of the state. This is, the bedrock of any concept of inherent human rights.
Right.
But the moment we enter the modern administrative system, that inalienable identity is challenged. The system demands a substitute. Every credential we carry, that SSN, the passport, the state ID, is, in the terminology of the material, a number of a man. It functions as a numerical proxy, a kind of legal shadow standing in for the real person. This conversion of a living, spiritual person into a countable, registrable, and most critically, a revocable object is the precise mechanism by which this beast operates. A living name cannot be canceled. An entry in a state file can be. So when a human being becomes merely an entry, their standing is conditional. It's suspended at the will of the system. And it is this silent swapping of identities that creates the spiritual danger. The system treats the revocable proxy as if it were the real foundational self. If the system has the power to decide whether one may work, bank, travel, or live with dignity, it has assumed ultimate authority over the conditions of existence, which, by the source's own definition, transforms that administrative body into an object of worship. A registry whose authority has to be recognized as the foundation of one's standing.
I agree that the system controls standing, but I would focus our attention on functionality and control rather than inherent ontological substitution. The most terrifying aspect described in the source is the establishment of a choke point. The system controls who may be recognized and therefore who may buy and sell. The danger, in my view, is in that effective control over recognition and participation, not necessarily that the bureaucratic apparatus is inherently extinguishing the divine spark within the person.
That is an interesting distinction, though I would say the practical outcome is very much the same.
Well, while the administrative system is undeniably tyrannical in its reach, we have to distinguish between administrative absence and ontological destruction. The source material itself, in places, concedes that if your credentials are revoked or you're denied standing, you can still breathe, walk, talk, and think. The sacred God-given identity isn't annihilated. Rather, the state prevents recognition and meaningful economic participation. One cannot work, bank, contract, vote. The control is administrative, which is exercised through the mechanism of conditional recognition. It rules by, as the source says, paperwork, permission, and proxies.
Those proxies, though, they are the functional mechanism of the substitution. They are the means by which the state elevates its power to an ultimate authority.
Look at the implications of the term alien, which the law applies to those without proper credentials. The source notes that an alien isn't someone who is metaphysically less human, but someone who is outside the legal body's recognition. They are excluded from the legal polity. Now, this exclusion is immensely dangerous. It restricts liberty, it jeopardizes survival, but it suggests that the power is exercised through conditional exclusion, the withholding of permission, rather than an outright metaphysical replacement of the intrinsic identity of the soul.
That distinction between function and metaphysics is critical. And it brings us back to where we started. What is the nature of identity when viewed through the lens of this source material? So let's dive into our first point of contention, the nature of identity, specifically the name versus the record. I would maintain that the text views a name as an ontological claim, a stamp of reality prior to government. The administrative system replaces this living name with a conditional entry or file. And this conversion makes the person fundamentally vulnerable to cancellation. It converts realities, life, liberty, fundamental standing, which should exist prior to the state, into conditional privileges that the state can arbitrarily suspend or revoke. This substitution is the essence of the beast's operation because it redefines the very origin of a person's rights.
I'm not convinced you can make that leap from administrative control to ontological ownership, because that assumes the state claims to possess or destroy the sacred identity. And I think that claim remains external to the text. While the system undeniably assigns a proxy, the legal shadow or avatar, as you called it, this is initially presented even within the system's own narrative as a functional necessity for management. Collecting taxes, policing, administering services, creating an orderly market. The state, in this view, creates a parallel identity system that governs legal and economic participation. This parallel system certainly usurps standing in the world. It denies your ability to act as a recognized legal agent. And that usurpation is catastrophic. But I'd argue it stops short of an outright destruction or replacement of the spiritual God-given identity. The danger is the usurpation of standing in the eyes of the world, making one an outsider, not necessarily the annihilation of the spiritual self.
The distinction you're drawing there is, I think, too fine for the system's practical impact. The usurpation of standing, when it's tied directly to the means of survival, to buying food, to earning wages, to existing lawfully, is precisely how the substitution achieves its spiritual dimension. If the only recognized you is the proxy in the file, then for all practical purposes, the file is the foundation of your reality within the world.
Okay, that brings us directly to our second point then. The challenging concept of worship and ultimate authority. I would challenge the idea that the pragmatic utilization of system credentials, say using an SSN to open a bank account or file taxes, equates to worship as the source material defines it. Isn't this just pragmatic adaptation to an existing systemic reality? The system achieves control through data, databases, and algorithmic leverage, through bureaucracy, not necessarily through an explicit demand for spiritual deference or bowing. We need to identify clearly where that line is crossed from forced administrative compliance to spiritual acceptance of the beast's authority.
That is a compelling point because most people, you're right, they feel forced to comply, not spiritually led. But let's look at the definition provided by the source material itself. Worship is recognizing ultimate authority, the fundamental source of existence, dignity, and permission. If the system controls the very gate between a person and basic economic survival, the ability to buy, sell, contract, be gainfully employed, it has established itself as the ultimate deciding factor of dignity and recognized existence in the temporal realm. The critical step isn't the act of opening the bank account itself, but the act of accepting the system-owned, revocable identity as the necessary, legitimate basis for your standing to do so. By accepting the proxy as the foundation of your existence, you are, by definition, accepting the substitution of authority. By granting the state the de facto power to define who exists in a lawful capacity, we are, in the source's interpretation, worshiping the registry by submitting to its terms of existence.
But if I use my driver's license to rent a car, I'm deferring to the administrative rules of the Department of Motor Vehicles. I am not spiritually deferring to it as my ultimate authority. How do we differentiate that peripheral use from the foundational destructive use?
The difference lies in the necessity for survival. Renting a car is a convenience. Earning a living wage and securing property are prerequisites for existence, and the source material focuses precisely on that economic choke point. Your driver's license may allow you to perform a certain function, sure, but your SSN or your birth certificate is often tied to wages, contracts, and property ownership, those pillars of existence. When the state controls whether your life is recognized as a lawful life, that control transcends mere administration. It transforms into an ontological threat to recognized being. The convenience of a car rental just isn't equivalent to the necessary permission to exist lawfully.
I will concede that the insight that the danger resides fundamentally in administration and not just in future gimmicks like microchips or barcodes, that is absolutely critical to understanding the material today.
My summary thesis, therefore, holds that the warning is not about speculative technology or some future cipher, but specifically about the state's claimed authority over identity. The number is dangerous not because of the digits themselves, but because it turns inalienable human beings into alienable, cancelable entries. And this shift proves that the power described in the text is already here, ruling our world through administrative mandates.
I agree that the core threat is administrative power exercised through conditional identity. However, we must return to that concept of alienable. The identity is conditional and revocable, yes. And while this power is terrifying, the heart of our disagreement should center on whether the function of administration is inherently and intrinsically tyrannical, or whether the apocalyptic warning is more narrowly focused on the alienating effect, the targeted inability to be recognized and participate, which is a matter of state power exercised through administration, rather than the administration being the beast entity itself. The beast is certainly manifesting through administration, but I would caution against identifying the mundane act of creating a record as the ultimate evil, rather than identifying the state's intent to weaponize that record for control over human destiny.
But the source makes that substitution explicit, almost unavoidable. It asks, are you a living name given by God, grounded in covenant? Or are you a permitted number owned by a system, grounded in conditional privilege? That choice is foundational, and the modern administrative system demands we choose the latter, simply to survive within the marketplace.
And that final existential choice hinges entirely on recognition, the very thing the system weaponizes by withholding it. It is a practical function of non-recognition that makes the system so dangerous and so effective in its tyranny.
So to conclude, I maintain that the core warning of the text is this existential choice between two foundations for standing: the living, inalienable name given by a higher power, or the permitted, conditional number owned by a system. The modern administrative state has fully implemented this substitution, demanding the acceptance of an alienable proxy as the necessary basis for lawful existence and economic survival. And the consequence of refusal is total exclusion.
And I would conclude by conceding that the system of administration constitutes a grave and immediate threat to human freedom by ruthlessly defining who counts and controlling the choke point of survival. However, I stress the necessity of identifying precisely where that substitution occurs, in the revocability of recognition and the subsequent loss of legal standing, and to continue to explore the nuances of power exercised through paperwork, permission, and proxies. The state rules by conditional recognition.
We have both demonstrated that this material raises profound questions about the nature of recognition, the sovereignty of the individual, and the true locus of human identity in the modern world.
Indeed. It forces us all to ask who owns the ultimate ledger that says we exist, and what degree of our inherent identity we compromise by accepting conditional existence under the terms of the administrative state.
Thank you for this essential conversation.
A pleasure, as always.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into territory that is usually fenced off and, let's be honest, pretty misunderstood.
It's a text that has launched 1,000 conspiracy theories.
Exactly. Countless books, and it's almost universally been treated as this highly specific puzzle to be solved. We are talking, of course, about Revelation 13.1e.
The number 666.
That's the one. But we are approaching this from a radically new perspective, driven by our source material, the number of a man, the beast of administration.
And that source material, it completely reframes the discussion. It asks us to look past the mystical numerology and the hunt for some future microchip, and instead see this passage as a structural critique of power.
Absolutely. So our mission today is a deep dive into 13.1e, examining 666 not as a mystical cipher, but as a framework for understanding modern administrative power and identity.
It's an incredibly thoughtful approach,
Yeah.
and frankly, a bit unsettling.
It is unsettling because it moves the threat from some distant future and places it squarely in the present, in our wallets, in our databases.
Right. And the source's whole intellectual approach is critical because it challenges, centuries of interpretation. For generations, people read, the number of the beast. It is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And their focus just lands on the digits.
The numbers themselves.
And numbers. The impulse is always to treat it as a cryptographic problem, a secret puzzle. They tie it to historical figures like Nero Caesar through gematria, or they jump to prophecies about barcodes.
Or microchips, that's the big one today.
Microchips. They're always looking for the cipher, the hidden identity of a single man, the Antichrist.
Okay, so let's unpack that immediately, because the source claims that this whole hunt for a cipher is, well, it's missing the forest for the trees. The key insight, which is so simple it's brilliant, is that the text itself provides the answer. And it's not the 3 sixes.
Precisely. The answer is right there in the parenthetical phrase. It is the number of a man.
Not the number of a specific man.
No. The source argues that this phrase, the number of a man, isn't just filler text. It's not a decorative flourish. It's the definitive operational clue. It tells us the nature of the beast system, not the name of its leader.
So it's describing a process.
It's describing a process. The beast, this administrative system, is defined by what happens when a living, breathing human being is converted into a countable, registrable, and administrable object.
So instead of focusing on what 6666 means as a math problem, we look at what number of a man describes as this universal bureaucratic action. That's a huge pivot.
It is. The beast, in this context, is defined as the massive, and I should add necessary, system that replaces a living autonomous identity, the name, which is tied to breath and covenant, with something entirely conditional and controllable.
The record, the file.
A registrable record. The beast of administration is the institutional process of quantifying existence, of turning a person into a file.
That is a staggering redefinition. It means the threat isn't some future antagonist riding in on a horse. It's the quiet, ubiquitous presence of databases, licenses, and social security cards.
The system itself.
So if we're going to analyze what we're potentially losing in that conversion, we have to start at the beginning. We need to understand identity before administration. Let's move into section 1, the inalienable name.
A great place to start.
I found the sources dive into the nature of identity in classical and scriptural texts incredibly powerful. The source claims identity is fundamentally a name, not a document, and it stresses this is an ontological claim.
Right.
Now, for you, the learner out there who hasn't spent time in a philosophy department, we need to clarify what an ontological claim means here.
It means identity is tied to being, to existence itself. It's about what something inherently is, regardless of any external validation or paperwork.
Okay, give us an analogy.
The source uses a simple one. The sky is ontologically blue. It doesn't need a government certificate to validate its blueness. It simply is. The source argues that a human being's identity is likewise primary. It's intrinsic, and it's independent of any institution.
So if identity is tied to being, then the act of naming takes on this immense significance. The source points out that in these foundational texts, naming isn't just labeling, like sticking a price tag on an object.
No, not at all. It's an act of acknowledgement and authority that defines vocation and reality. When the texts describe God naming things or Adam naming the creatures, it's establishing an intrinsic link between the name, the breath, the purpose, and the lineage.
So identity comes from the source of life itself. It's something you receive, not something that's issued to you by a clerk.
Exactly. And that establishes a crucial foundation. If identity is bound to breath and lineage passing through generations, then it is inherently sacred, which means it exists outside the jurisdiction of human institutions.
It can't be manufactured, it can't be issued, revoked, or sold. It's owned only by the bearer.
which makes it inalienable.
Inalienable, and we see the immense weight of this kind of identity most clearly in the transformative renamings that the source details. A name change in this context isn't a casual legal update. It's an absolute shift in one's being, a covenant with destiny.
Right, these aren't just cosmetic changes.
Let's spend some time on those examples because they beautifully illustrate the difference between a name and a number. Let's start with Abram becoming Abraham.
Okay, so Abram meant exalted father. It was an honored title, but it was limited, to his immediate context, his family, his tribe.
Local.
Very local. But when he becomes Abraham, which means father of a multitude, that's a cosmological change. It marks the establishment of a profound new covenant. His identity was literally enlarged to encompass a promised future.
So the name didn't just describe his past status.
No, it created his future destiny. It's the difference between a label describing what you currently are and a title defining what you're becoming through a higher authority.
Okay, what about Jacob?
Jacob becoming Israel. This one is even more visceral. Jacob means deceiver or supplanter, reflecting his early actions, grabbing his brother's heel.
It's a name tied to his flaws, his character.
Exactly. He only receives the name Israel, which means one who struggles with God, after wrestling through the night with a divine being. The name Israel is the evidence of his existential shift, his struggle, his wound, and his victory. It's an earned, transformative title.
A scar and a promotion all in one.
You could say that. It marks his new relationship to reality. And then you see it again in the New Testament.
Simon becoming Peter the Rock.
Right. Simon was just a man, a fisherman. His name was common. Peter, or Petrus, signifies his new vocation, his purpose, as the foundation upon which the church would be built. The name is intrinsically tied to function and ultimate authority.
So the source uses these examples to draw a really clear line. When an ontological name is conferred, it comes with covenant, lineage, and transformative power.
But when the administrative system assigns a number, an SSN, a birth registry ID, that number comes with no covenant, no lineage, no transformative power. It merely signifies a conditional, temporary relationship between the individual and the issuing institution.
The government-issued number is a mark of administrative convenience and conditional access.
While the God-given or lineage-inherited name is a mark of destiny and intrinsic reality. The administrative system treats the person as a liability to be managed.
And the ontological name treats the person as a vessel of destiny.
That's a stark contrast, and it grounds the next major philosophical point, the concept of inalienable rights.
Right. The source grounds this whole concept of identity in the tradition of the American founders, specifically referencing the declaration that human beings are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. This phrase, we hear it all the time, but the source says it's actually the jurisdictional key to this entire deep dive.
It is, because it defines the boundary of governmental power. We have to look at the word unalienable itself. We use it frequently, but the source demands we restore its precise technical definition.
So in its most potent sense, what does unalienable mean?
It means that which cannot be sold, transferred, surrendered, revoked, or even justly taken away, even by the possessor. It is intrinsic to your very being.
Okay, so give me an example. My car is not unalienable.
Your car is alienable. Your property, your money, it's all alienable. You can sell it, transfer it, and the state can seize it under certain conditions.
But my consciousness, my life itself.
That is inalienable. Your capacity for conscious thought, your very ability to experience life, is inalienable. A government might restrict you from exercising that capacity, say in prison, but the fundamental right to that capacity exists prior to and outside of the cage.
Right. The state doesn't give me life, so it can't, in a just sense, take it.
Exactly. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. These rights are understood to be pre-state realities. They exist because the human being exists. They are grounded in being, not permission.
And that is the crucial distinction.
It's everything. A government can certainly protect your right to life, but it doesn't grant you the spark of life itself. A government can restrict your movement, but it doesn't grant you the fundamental capacity for self-determination.
I think this is where we have to pause and reflect on why this distinction is so necessary. If you believe your rights are granted by the state,
then they can be taken away by the state. They become privileges, not rights.
But if you believe your rights are granted by a creator, they precede the state and are therefore theoretically untouchable by the state.
That is the entire philosophical weight to the argument. The source makes the parallel explicit. Just as you do not receive your life from a government agency, you do not receive your core identity from a registry. Both must originate outside the temporary conditional jurisdiction of human institutions.
So if the true name is inalienable and predates the state, then the administrative process is automatically running a secondary, derivative, and necessarily inferior system.
A system built not to recognize the person, but to manage their affairs.
And this takes us right into the belly of the beast, the necessity and function of numerical identity.
Which brings us to a crucial point of nuance. The source isn't an argument for anarchy.
Right, that's important. We're not saying we should burn down the DMV.
Not at all. Modern civilization, especially high-density, high-technology society, simply cannot operate solely on the principle of the ontological name. It requires a different logic, the logic of scale, of consistency, of management.
And this is where my initial skepticism comes in. I mean, how else do you administer mass-scale services, collect taxes fairly, enforce laws, or ensure public safety for hundreds of millions of people without some mechanism for counting and tracking?
You can't.
The necessity of a reliable administrative structure seems undeniable.
And that is the insidious brilliance of the system. Its necessity is its greatest defense. To achieve efficient governance managing populations, allocating resources, issuing permits, the state must create an identity structure that runs parallel to the person's true living identity.
We're talking about the infrastructure of the modern nation-state. This administrative identity is the interface. It's the API that allows the vast, complex machinery of government and commerce to engage with the individual person in a quantifiable way.
And the source notes, this process of conversion, this creation of the parallel identity, begins at the earliest possible moment.
At birth.
The moment of birth. That moment is so pivotal. Two identities are born simultaneously. The human is given a name by their family, establishing their historical and ontological identity, the inalienable self.
And almost instantly, a legal document is issued. A certificate of birth. A number is assigned. A social security number, a citizen ID, some equivalent administrative placeholder.
And that number, that administrative proxy, is the foundation. It's the seed from which the entire administrative life springs. And it must be continually fed and validated throughout life with required credentials.
It's a cascading system. The source lists them. Driver's licenses, state IDs, passports, visas, green cards. Every single one of these items is essentially a piece of evidence.
Evidence proving the existence of the numerical proxy.
Right, allowing the state to recognize and categorize the person. I mean, think about the massive system behind a single driver's license.
It's immense. It requires verifying the SSN, which requires verifying the birth certificate, which requires establishing residence, testing competence. The document itself is not just proof of driving ability, it's a laminated manifestation of the administrative self.
And this brings us to the source's highly descriptive and evocative terminology. It stresses this core distinction. None of these credentials are the human being.
No. They are strictly representations of the human being inside a bureaucratic structure.
The source provides three terms that are incredibly powerful for understanding this relationship: legal shadows, avatars, and numerical proxies.
Let's dissect the term shadow. A shadow moves with the body, it mimics the original, but it lacks substance. It has no life, no color, no depth. If the original person dies, the shadow vanishes.
And the administrative shadow is the one that the government interacts with. When I pay my taxes, the IRS isn't engaging with my soul or my character.
They're engaging with the shadow attached to your SSN.
Then there's the term avatar. In modern usage, especially digitally, an avatar is the figure we use to interact within a closed virtual system, a video game, a social network.
The source applies this definition directly to our bureaucratic existence.
So we use the avatar, the ID card, the account number, the tax filing name to interact with the legal and economic structure of the state. The real ontological person exists outside that ledger.
But their avatar is constrained entirely by the rules of the system. And this is why the source links this directly back to Revelation 13.18. Every one of those credentials, every single number assigned, is argued to be a realization of the prophecy, the number of a man.
A numerical proxy that stands in for a human life.
Substituting the conditional for the inalienable.
Let's detail that conversion process with an example. Say you want to buy a house. The process isn't really about you, the person.
Not at all. It's about the legal shadow. The bank runs your credit score, which is a number linked to your SSN. The title company requires your driver's license number. The tax authority requires your filing status.
The person who signs the documents is a legal construct, an administrative entity.
An entity whose primary defining characteristic is a collection of numbers that can be tracked, scored, and validated. A living name becomes an entry in a massive distributed database. A person becomes a file that can be queried, audited, frozen, or deleted.
This, the source views, is the fundamental quiet act of the beast of administration, the constant necessary reduction of a living being into manageable data.
And the process is so insidious because it's not, malicious in its intent. It is purely functional. It's designed for efficiency, but in that efficiency, it executes the substitution of authority.
And once that conversion happens, everything is routed through the number.
Everything.
Yeah.
Which immediately introduces the critical choke point.
This is where the theoretical framework hits the concrete reality of daily life. The source acknowledges that a person can physically exist without any credentials. They can breathe, they can walk, talk, think, completely unburdened by paperwork.
But the moment they attempt to enter the structured world of modern commerce or governance, they are stopped cold. Meaningful participation is routed entirely through that validated, active numerical identity.
It becomes the mandatory, non-negotiable gatekeeper.
A gatekeeper, yes. Let's expand on the barriers in source list. It's not just an inconvenience. It constitutes an administrative exile from the civil economy.
Okay, so let's walk through it. What can't you do?
You cannot lawfully work. No W-2, no contract, no legal payroll. You cannot open a bank account, which is crucial for modern finance, immediately pushing you outside the structured economic system.
And it affects basic shelter, right? You can't rent or buy property using conventional means because property transfers and lease agreements demand verifiable administrative identity.
You can't cross recognized international borders lawfully. You can't even secure necessary utilities or basic services like a phone contract or, in some places, access to subsidized health care if you can't prove who you are to the system.
And crucially, you can't vote. You can't hold recognized legal standing in a court without proving your administrative reality.
So the system doesn't prevent you from being alive.
It prevents you from being recognized
Yeah.
as a participant in the legal and commercial realm.
In a system-based world, recognition is paramount.
I have to push back here a little, though. Doesn't every society require some means of differentiating between citizens, residents, and visitors? I mean, this administrative structure seems like the only non-violent way to manage a large, complex population. Is the source arguing for dismantling this necessary structure?
That's a great question. And no, the source is not arguing for dismantling the state. It's arguing for recognizing the cost, recognizing the spiritual invocation of the parallel identity.
So the danger is not the existence of the number.
It's the elevation of the number to ultimate authority. The moment recognition becomes paramount, the number holds the power of life or death.
In the economic sense.
In the economic sense. Because if the system doesn't recognize your existence, your physical, ontological existence is rendered irrelevant to the functions of modern society.
Administrative invisibility.
That is the key tool of the beast. And this takes us straight to the most explicit biblical reference point in the source's analysis.
The power to buy and sell.
Exactly. Revelation's warning is clarified here through this lens of administration. The beast doesn't need to kill everyone. It only needs to control who may buy and sell.
That ability to transact is the economic choke point, and the system owns the database controlling it.
And the source argues that this is achieved not through visible oppression or chains, but through the efficiency of the ledger. Think about the infrastructure that validates every transaction today. Credit scoring systems, automated background checks, know your customer requirements, AML regulations.
KYC and AML, right?
All of these systems demand a valid, verifiable numerical proxy to proceed.
So whoever owns the gate between a person and their ability to acquire food, shelter, and survival, the capacity to earn a living, doesn't need an army.
They just need the power to toggle a digital switch in a central database. It is ruled by database.
If your number is flagged, if your ID expires, if your legal shadow falls into administrative disfavor,
You are immediately shut out from the necessities of life in a structured economy. You cannot transact, you cannot buy, and you certainly cannot sell or contract for services.
and the source finds the terminology used by the law itself to describe those without valid credentials deeply revealing.
The word alien.
Right. What does the source say about that term?
That term is key to understanding the nature of this exclusion. Legally, an alien is someone who belongs to another jurisdiction, someone outside the body politic or legal territory. They're physically here, but administratively elsewhere.
So the law isn't claiming the person is less human. That's a moral statement.
No, the law is making a technical statement. They are outside the operational legal body. They are physically present, breathing, walking. But they are administratively absent. They do not count in the ledger of commerce.
So the heart of the beast of administration is this quiet structural power to define who counts.
To grant or revoke that administrative existence, and thereby to control all access to the economic framework. This allows the system to determine standing, and the conditional nature of that standing is the foundation of the existential swap the source describes next.
The economic power is the lever. If they control the transaction, they control the recognized existence of the individual. Okay, let's go there.
This next section analyzes the ultimate danger, the quiet, pervasive substitution of identities. We are always running these two parallel identities, but we allow the conditional one to supersede the real one.
So let's reiterate the two players in this existential drama for the listener. First, we have the true identity.
The living name, inalienable, tied to being and originating outside state jurisdiction, from God, from lineage.
And second, we have the state identity.
The numerical proxy, which is explicitly alienable. It is revocable, suspendable, and exists only at the pleasure and mandate of the administrative system that issued it.
The danger, according to the source, is the inversion, the swap. The administrative system treats the revocable conditional identity, the driver's license, the SSN, as if it were the real and necessary basis for human standing and participation.
And that creates a profound inversion of authority. The true, inalienable self, the person who exists prior to the state, is made functionally subservient to the administrative self, the number. My recognized reality is now derived from the state's ledger, not from my intrinsic nature as a human being.
You know, we see this psychological swap happening constantly. When we meet someone professionally, our first interaction often involves exchanging administrative details, our title, our phone number, our company ID.
We interact with their proxy before we interact with the human.
It's the administrative necessity bleeding into social reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the result of losing that state-issued identity is the most frightening concept of all, the disappearance. If the numerical identity is canceled, frozen, or denied, if the administrative record is flagged, the person effectively disappears from lawful existence and the world of commerce overnight.
Let's think of some practical examples of that disappearance. A bank account frozen due to a tax flag, a passport revoked for administrative reasons, a driver's license suspended pending some arbitrary verification.
These actions don't touch the physical person, but they destroy their capacity to function.
They become a non-person, for all intents and purposes of the modern economy.
They still exist in physical space, but they lack the necessary administrative existence required to transact, to move, to work, or to receive sustenance within the structured system. The administrative beast has simply performed a ledger edit, and the individual is administratively exiled.
The physical person is tethered to the existence of the digital proxy.
It's a terrifying dependency.
Which brings us to the most debated part of the entire passage, the mark of the beast. The source states explicitly that Revelation's warning is not about technology, barcodes, or microchips, at least not in the sense of a physical implant being the primary offense.
The tools are secondary. The true threat, the source argues, is authority over identity. The crucial question is one of jurisdiction. Who decides who you are? Who controls whether your name is recognized? Who owns the ledger that grants or denies you the status of a recognized participant?
So if the state controls the ledger that grants or denies you the ability to buy and sell, then it holds ultimate authority over your recognized functional identity.
And the mark must be understood as the symbol of that ultimate submission.
This leads to the source's profound redefinition of the mark. To accept the beast's mark is not a physical implantation.
But in acceptance of the substitution, it is the decision to allow a system-owned, alienable, revocable identity to entirely replace the God-given inalienable name as the basis of your standing in the world.
The passage mentions the mark being placed on the hand or the forehead. If we look at this metaphorically, as the source suggests, what does that substitution signify for our daily lives?
The hand represents labor, action, and commerce, the capacity to buy and sell, to work and transact.
What would I do?
And the forehead represents belief, thought, and consent, the intellectual acceptance of the authority, what I agree to. The administrative system demands that both your intent, your forehead, and your work, your hand, must be validated by its mark, the number, the license, the credential.
It is a surrender of ontological authority to the administrative structure. Every time we present our revocable credential, say, showing a license to open a bank account. We are tacitly agreeing to the system's definition of us as a manageable numerical entity.
And this quiet surrender is far more pervasive than any future technological nightmare. The source argues that the mark is already widespread, embedded in every piece of paperwork we submit and every ID we carry. We are constantly trading our inalienable name for the conditional recognition of the state's number.
And we don't realize we're making a spiritual or philosophical trade-off because the administrative identity is required for convenience and basic survival. You can't exist comfortably in the modern world without your proxy.
Exactly. We accept the substitution because we cannot function without it. The trade-off is efficiency and security versus ontological autonomy. And when that trade-off is accepted as the fundamental basis of our standing, we have essentially bowed to the administrative system.
Which leads us to the source's most provocative final point.
Worshipping the registry.
Right. This section ties the entire argument together by redefining the language of worship in this modern administrative context. So worship, in the source materials view, is not just kneeling in a temple.
No, it is recognizing ultimate authority and jurisdiction.
Ultimate authority.
The definition of ultimate authority is paramount here. Historically, worship involved fealty, allegiance, and seeking the source of all blessing and provision. So if a system holds the power to decide your fundamental economic status, whether you may buy, sell, travel, or live with recognized dignity,
then that system has usurped the role of ultimate provider and definer of reality. If the registry is the source of your wages, your shelter, your mobility, and your legal status, then the system has effectively become your god.
at least in the sphere of commerce.
The source explores the attributes of the administrative system that mirror divine authority. The registry demands a form of omnipresence. It touches every transaction, every border crossing, every payment.
It wields omnipotence, the power to instantly delete your existence from the lawful world. And it acts as the source of provision, providing welfare, facilitating wages, and defining economic legitimacy.
That is truly unsettling. We rely on the system so completely that if it were to cease functioning, or if we were denied access, our ability to sustain ourselves would disappear almost instantly.
And the source argues that Revelation foresaw a type of threat entirely unlike the empires and armies of its historical context. It foresaw a threat not of brute force, but of structural bureaucratic complexity, the beast of administration.
A threat ruling by endless paperwork, conditional permissions, and numerical proxies.
And the normalization and necessity of this framework makes the surrender quiet and almost invisible.
Right.
We justify the substitution as pragmatic. I need my driver's license to drive, not because the state is my god.
Of course.
But the moment the license, the proxy, becomes the absolute requirement for existence, and the state reserves the right to revoke that license at will, the underlying autonomy of the individual has been compromised. We accept the substitution because we cannot function without it. And in that acceptance, in granting the ledger the power to define our standing.
We have essentially worshipped the image of the beast.
In the source's view, yes.
It's a compelling argument that forces us to re-examine the relationship between convenience and freedom, between necessity and surrender, which is a good place to start summarizing.
I agree.
This deep dive into the number of a man, the beast of administration, fundamentally challenged the notion that Revelation 13.18 is purely a technological prophecy. The central argument we've explored today is immediate and profound. The number of a man is not a mysterious future code.
It is the existing administrative proxy system already embedded in our lives. It's found in birth records, printed on every card we carry, and embedded in the databases that govern our economic existence.
And the danger of the system is not its efficiency, but the transformation it enacts.
It converts inalienable human beings, beings whose identity and rights are intrinsic, into alienable, manageable entries. It grants standing based on a conditional record rather than inherent reality.
And we, for the sake of convenience and survival, participate willingly in that swap.
And this administrative system creates an absolute economic choke point, ensuring compliance not through visible violence, but through the revocation of recognition. The power to buy and sell becomes the ultimate, quiet lever of control.
It is a profound argument for shifting our focus away from physical identification documents and toward the philosophical authority those documents represent. We must ask ourselves if we are prioritizing the administrative proxy over the ontological self.
Which brings us to the concluding thought. The source material forces us to confront an existential choice that is playing out in every modern society. if the administrative system demands that you be a manageable file, owned and defined by a conditional number.
While your spiritual and philosophical tradition insists that you are an independent, inalienable being defined by a living name.
You must ultimately decide which authority defines your standing in the world.
Which brings us back to the source's central tension, the final, provocative question for you to take away. Are you a living name given by God, bound by covenant and destiny?
Or are you a permitted number, owned and validated by a system? That is the ultimate meaning, not of the digit 666, but of the far more profound and present reality, the number of a man.
A deeply unsettling and essential distinction for every learner out there to carry with them. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.